everybody. Welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Dad. It's your favorite dads, Nate and Francis. Nate, it is balls-ass cold here. Again, St. Louis is doing that thing where we had, like, 2 weeks ago. You know how in the Midwest it'll be cold, and then, like, you'll have one day that's, like, 75 degrees inexplicably?
Yeah, I remember that from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Yeah, well, we're on the other side of that. And last week I was in the tropics, and I'm no longer in the tropics. I'm starting to understand snowbirds, the people who go and live in Florida for the winter, because my wife and I try to escape the Midwest in February because it is the most depressing month of the year. And usually it's fine, but like we came back, it was just so, like, it is single digits Fahrenheit here and snowing again. Gonna get another like 6 inches of snow. So
we haven't had any snow that sticks, and I technically live in the fucking Alps, but I mean, I think it's too low of an elevation. It has been cold here, and it's gotten colder. The biggest thing was that there were like some big storms that have swept through like the UK and Ireland, and then down into Northwest Europe, and we haven't really gotten too bad of it, but it's definitely like below freezing. So it's the biggest thing that I've noticed is beyond like you gotta. I always wear my hat and bring my gloves in my pocket in case I need them. But the other thing you notice is just like, it's very dry in the house. Like I have to moisturize here more than I ever did in England. And it's sort of broken me of my habit of being an intermittent moisturizer, because otherwise my skin is really dry, which is, props to them for building houses that are insulated and stuff, but insulation plus radiator heat, plus they have the vents, to like let out humidity or whatever. Like, it is dry.
You left a damp country, and now look.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I don't have to worry about the general mold factor, because
true,
British houses are damp and cold, and so mold is ever present unless you're heating it a lot and spending a ton of money on heating. So here, the heating is actually included in the cost of the. It's part of the charges, the monthly charges you pay. Heat, hot water, all of that stuff is all covered. So our electric bill is just for like appliances and stuff, and it's like very cheap compared to Britain. Very, very cheap. And it's like almost all renewable energy. It's just that you can pay extra to have it be just renewable energy that's generated in the local canton, the like local state, which I didn't opt to do because I don't want to spend an extra 15 francs on my power. But my power bill is like the equivalent of like $85, $90 a month, whereas in Britain it was far, far higher. All the time.
Yeah, we pay extra for like wind power, but I don't know where in Missouri there's any wind turbines. Like they're all over Illinois, especially up northern Illinois. Maybe they're up northern Missouri. I don't know. I haven't seen any.
There's definitely a ton in Indiana, as well as a ton of solar panels in Indiana, which surprised me when I was back like the most recently. But red states loved renewable energy until suddenly it stopped. It suddenly became like kind of like a shibboleth that you had to be like, actually, it's gay.
Yeah, actually, getting power from the sun is super gay. It's gay and woke.
Well, the ancient Greeks worshipped the sun god, and they were super gay, in my opinion. So you are too if you take solar power. I don't know. Like also like some of the stuff where people are still really mad about the fucking Chobani commercial with the like solar punk cartoon, and they've just like all like the weird blue check guys were going on about how it's like this isn't possible without a warrior class and traditional masculinity or some bullshit. You're like, it's a fucking yogurt ad, dude.
It's yogurt that makes you poop good.
Yeah,
like that's
who even knows. But I mean, it's my mom said that we went hiking this weekend with a friend of ours, and my mom was like, it looks warmer than here, and I was like, well, it's actually like probably right about freezing here, and she's like, yeah, but 32 sounds balmy to me right now because it's like -1 in Minneapolis. -1 Fahrenheit. So that's for the Celsius heads out there. I don't even know the calculation, but it sucks.
Yeah, it's fucking cold. It's well below freezing. Yeah, we were in the Bahamas. We were on a cruise, and it was very nice. It was very warm. It was Marvel themed. My daughter was very into the Marvel, seeing all the Marvel characters and everything. I don't know where she got like her comic book love for Marvel, because it certainly doesn't come from me or my wife. She just kind of discovered Marvel on her own, and now she just regurgitates Marvel facts at me every once in a while, which is, I feel like, a step up from Pokemon, like, because Pokemon feels a little too childish for me. But with Marvel, you get a lot more. We've been watching, like, our Saturday morning cartoons have been watching the 1993 X-Men, which surprisingly holds up like 30 plus years later.
I watched a few of those here and there. And then obviously I, like so many people of our generation, saw the Juggernaut dub of that one episode of X-Men. So I'm familiar with it. I think at that age, because 93, was the year I turned 9, I was watching Power Rangers, but I think more than importantly, I think it was the shows I really liked at the time, like animated things, were the Batman series that was on Fox at the time, the animated Batman
animated
which was
series,
good,
yeah.
and then also Gargoyles with,
yes.
if I remember correctly, you had Marina Sirtis and who's the
Keith
guy?
David.
Yeah, who's the guy who played Riker? Jonathan Frakes.
Jonathan Frakes.
Yeah. They were on that, or if not regularly, then as guest spots. And so, yeah, I looking back on that stuff, I mean, some of it holds up okay. I would also say too that Marvel is an interesting one because of sort of what it's become. But I mean, they make a lot of money off it, and they finally kind of like catapulted the popularity of the fan comic stuff to, or the comic books into movies. But that was always such a thing that people talked about, like not being able to do in the 90s, which is interesting. I read Marvel comics in Germany because they sold them at the shopettes and PXs and stuff on base. And I think my mom, although she probably didn't like it, she was like, well, it's in English and he's reading. So she let us read Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, and I think there was another one. Who even knows? There were 4 Spider-Man franchises at the time for the comic books. And then every now and then I would get stuff like Fantastic Four. But for me, what was interesting was with Marvel, I think that like this is an interesting phenomenon. 2 things that when you look back now, I think that like they had tried to pivot to a slightly more mature audience and they had actually done a pretty good job of it. But I don't know if that's still the case with Marvel Comics. The other example I was going to give was weirdly National Geographic magazine, which used to be in the 80s and early 90s, did like really, really, really good reporting, really good journalism. And I think that a lot of the trustees in general didn't like that about it. And they wanted it to go back to not, because they were kind of like, there was a time when National Geographic was doing articles like on like social stuff about like countries and places in the world that were like Life magazine tier, like really, really good reporting and amazing photos and just in general. I mean, I remember reading it as a kid. I could just look at I loved the pictures and then reading the captions. And then as a teenager, I remember going back and reading a bunch of my old issues from the early 90s, and the stories were phenomenal. And hilariously, I bring it up with Marvel because same thing. I wouldn't say this was a phenomenal story, but it was kind of interesting because I was reading Marvel or Spider-Man comics. I want to say it was Amazing Spider-Man, but I can't remember, when they introduced Carnage and the whole Carnage story arc. And it does not really give me, I'm not particularly fond of it. I think it's really bad, but it was interesting because I don't know enough about comic history, and God knows that's a fucking place I don't want to wade into with wrong details. But I'm pretty sure Seth MacFarlane was involved in some of the things, which drawing, I think, for them at the time. And I think he drew some of the stuff with Carnage, if I remember correctly. And then he went on to do his other thing. But I actually found the Venom is the biggest enemy of Spider-Man, and then Venom and Spider-Man have to team up to fight Carnage. That to be like a pretty interesting plot as a kid. And also Venom, I think that was a useful way of sort of like retconning the bad fan reaction to the new Spider-Man suit by turning a storyline where actually like it's fucking infected. It's like an alien thing that like makes him go crazy, and then it absorbs Eddie Brock and turns him into Venom. And Cletus Cassidy is just a psycho. But like, I don't know, early 90s, everyone's like, we have to have a complete psycho killer. We have to have a fucking like Michael Douglas in Falling Man, but a million times we're falling down, but a million times worse. That's just got to be in there somehow. Because it was pretty violent. I mean, it was like Carnage just like murders people wholesale. Like he's a huge piece of shit. And yeah, I found that to be, it was interesting because like my conception of Marvel comics was reading those things front to back. And I'll leave you with one Marvel detail that I think you might find funny is before Marvel and the franchise and the movies and, Infinity Marvel movies and all this stuff happened, there was a lot of discussion about like, are they ever going to make it? Is it possible? They've talked about it forever. Are they ever going to make a real Spider-Man movie? Can they? Would they? Will anyone finance it? Will it be successful? And I remember reading some of the fan mail letters that were published, like the comments in Spider-Man. And one of the people was like, I think a great pick to play Peter Parker would be Jim Carrey. People don't really know him that well, but I think he'd be a great actor for it, which is bizarre to think of. But also Jim Carrey just wasn't well known at the time. It was before The Mask. It was before Ace Ventura. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah. I was going to say,
we're talking 92, 93.
Yeah, this was pre-Batman as well. Before he was the Riddler.
Well, the Riddler was he was the Riddler in, wasn't that in Batman Forever 95? Because Val Kilmer's Batman was 95, and then I can't remember if he was in, what's the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger as like Mr. Freeze? What was that one called?
There's Batman Forever and there's Batman.
Who fucking knows?
They were bad. We're also, I'm going to say, we're going to get yelled at. Fantastic Four was Marvel. It's actually like the first Marvel.
Oh wow! I said, I'm going into it not knowing anything about it.
Yeah.
Well, who was there? Because like DC had an equivalent sort of like
DC was Superman. Like Superman and Batman were the DC.
right.
Big ones for
I
DC.
must be mixing this shit up. Yeah, you're right. Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
Sorry. You know what, nerds, you can fucking sacrifice me. If I made an equivalent mistake about like, post-punk bands from the late 70s and early 80s, I too would want to fucking exact revenge on that person and humiliate them.
That is my daughter, who, if she was here, she would have been yelling at me a while ago about like, no, that's not DC.
Sorry, I would like to get it wrong, or rather, I would like to get it right, but I just so often get it wrong. What I wanted to say though was it's just interesting because like I found that art stuff and visual storytelling was actually really interesting in those, but I just stopped being a fan. And like, I think I saw the first Spider-Man movie just in theaters like everybody else did because it was, they made a movie out of Spider-Man. But I think other than Cynthia wanted to see Black Panther in theaters and we went and saw it, that's the only Marvel movie I've seen in theaters since then. And like, I'm not going to like be a hater about it. It's just, it's still my thing.
My daughter is really into Marvel comics. She's not into the movies. And we've tried to watch the movies, but they're all like 3 hours fucking long. And it's hard for me to continue my interest in it. And a 9-year-old with ADHD is certainly also not going to be there. But I've watched probably maybe about half of the Marvel movies that have been out so far. Maybe like if I'd have to look at a big list and go through everything.
Cynthia and I watched part of Into the Spider-Verse with her, and she said it's actually really good.
Tom Holland's a good Spider-Man. He looks like a skinny little nerd who is just he looks like a wide-eyed high school student.
But also the animated one with Miles Morales, like that.
Yeah, that's really good. Into the Spider-Verse.
I was surprised at how good that seemed and how much it kind of felt like it was kind of keeping with the original spirit of Spider-Man. Like having read the comics a lot. Like I didn't read them in like the classic era when it was brand new, but like I did read it when what would now be considered old school stuff because it's just so long ago. But yeah, I mean, to each their own, I suppose. I liked comics when I was a kid and when I was a teenager, and I really liked drawing as a kid and as a teenager. And so like I think comic art was the thing that was like a lot of inspiration. Obviously, I went through I didn't really ever get into manga because like it was just so impossible to find it. Where growing up, I did get some anime videos from Blockbuster, but they just typically weren't very many of them.
No,
we just did an episode of Lions about the movie Akira, and I was talking about how amazing it is to have watched it with accurate subtitles because I watched the 1990 Orion movies dub where the guy who plays Leonardo in the Ninja Turtles is Kaneda's voice, and the story makes no fucking sense. It's so badly dubbed.
Okay, then that's because I never understood the love for Akira because I watched probably that terrible dub years ago and it's like none of this movie makes sense. I don't know why anybody likes this, but apparently I just didn't understand it because they were not presenting it to me correctly. I
will say that if you watch it now with like a Blu-ray or like a 4K, like an HD or 4K, like the sheer gorgeousness of the art and the animation and how incredibly detailed and how like thoroughly animated it is, I am continually surprised when I see things because like knowing a little more about computer motion graphics and the fact that like there's basically only one sequence that's computer generated in that entire thing. It's just the little like spectral display of the sort of like brain scans that the scientist is looking at. Other than that, it's all hand drawn, and apparently it's drawn in a way that's like far more intensive of in between frames versus your standard animation. And so it's very like smooth, but also just insanely detailed. Like I remember watching it the other day when we were doing this, and just like there's a scene where in one of the kind of like civil order disturbances, the cops are firing CS gas at protesters, and there's a scene where all this cloud of CS gas is kind of following after these people, and they're running under a highway overpass, and then the smoke kind of hits the overpass and kind of billows over it, and just in that quick shot of a second, maybe a second and a half, but just like how much detail they've even put into like how smoke is going to billow around a concrete structure. It's insane. It's so detailed. Like it's just so artistically incredible. But I will say the story makes way more sense the newer dub is okay, the like 2001 dub, but I watched it with Japanese language and with subtitles, and it's just there's just so much I didn't understand, both because I was 12 but also like because it was just very poorly done. And now at the end of the day also like there's a certain element of it where it's kind of a speculative sci-fi thing of like it's sort of like it's like the midichlorians thing from Star Wars, but what if it was like better thought through? Like what if you could harness all of the power of like cells dividing over the course of all of human evolution, and it's all contained within cells, but there's just so much incredible energy being released, and it's like that's kind of like what Akira is. But also I've never read the manga. But I don't know, that's a side note. I guess it's just more like, I'm not a hater for comic books. I'm just not a huge fan. I'm not a hater for, I have all sorts of the fucking stock jokes about anime and manga and stuff, but like, I mean, the only manga I've ever actually read that I actually was like, I am interested in this and want to watch it and read it all the way to the end is Berserk. And I started reading that like during COVID. So it's cool. It's so cool.
I have the same. Like, I didn't really start getting into any of this until my daughter was reading it, and I said, well, okay, I'll give some of it a chance. I didn't grow up watching anime.
No,
there just wasn't, there just wasn't as much as there was now.
Well, no, and it was so hard to find, and what was available would just be like kind of like, luck of the draw.
There's no Crunchyroll back in the 90s, man. There was no, what were you watching Evangelion on? Because I never watched that. I didn't watch.
Wow. So my brother started studying Japanese in college, and then he went and lived in Japan for a study abroad for a year, and then got a job there in 2006 and moved there, and he didn't move back until 2016. And in 2002, when he was getting ready to, 2000, it would have been 02 or 03. I can't remember if it was either like he was still in school or it was before he went to study abroad. He had figured out how to, like, whatever you needed to pull stuff off Usenet to get lots of fan subs for anime that had been, people had done the late 90s, early 2000s, like digitization of stuff, which was pretty difficult at the time because the file size made it such that if something went wrong at any point, it would corrupt it and crash, and then you'd lose all that work, and you were having to do it like a one-to-one, like playing a videotape into a capture card. But he was getting stuff. He got Evangelion that way on like a 240p rip, like WMV or MAV or whatever the early days. I can't remember the file formats. And I really didn't get into it at all. Something about it just felt too, even though like I think at 17 I would have been close to the target audience for it, it was just a little too childish. And I think compared to Akira, and then also compared to like other, like I really loved the movie Trainspotting at the time, because I'm a weeb for the United Kingdom. But also like that level of like, this is like, it's like pushing boundaries, but it's cool and it's funny and it's interesting. Like that level kind of was what I was into. And I was reading a lot too. And similarly with books like that. And so for me, Evangelion, like, I don't know, I think I had kind of slightly aged out of it, and I just couldn't get it because it just felt a little too goofy in that kind of like anime standard way. I didn't actually watch it all the way until the end, until 2019, I think, 2018, 2019, when it was on Netflix. And Netflix UK had it, and it had good subtitles. And so I just watched it all the way to the end. And actually I was like, wow, this is actually really good. I see why it's so well reviewed. That's why it's endured so much. But I think my brother was like, it wasn't just like, he was into just Japanese pop culture stuff in general. I think he would actually, you could say he wasn't really a weeb, because it wasn't just, I mean, he was, but he was like an authentic weeb, I suppose. He was weeb Icarus. He flew so close to the sun that he actually like got so into Japanese culture that at a certain point he was speaking Japanese more than English. And then like, his handwriting changed because he was so used to writing in Japanese that like when he wrote in English, it was like just very different than before. He was watching stuff and I was like, I'm not into this. I'm not into J-pop. The Pillows was the only band he ever introduced me to that I actually wound up liking anything from. And I never got into it. And I really never got into, like, other than maybe to some extent graphic novels in college because of some similar interest in art. But yeah, man, I mean, I don't know. I'm talking a lot here. And I guess what I'm saying is I support whatever makes kids want to read stuff and like if they're interested in it. And especially in my case, like the art itself was cool. I wanted to be like, oh, how can I draw like that? How can I draw fucked up hands like Seth MacFarlane?
Yeah, the idea like back in the 90s when they're like, well, we don't want to make comic book movies, but like they were making comic book movies that were really good, but they were just incredibly subversive at the same time. Like, obviously you have Blade, which is a movie that I don't think that Disney would be able to.
But Blade is
today.
Late though. Blade is what, 98 or 99? Like it's late.
98. Yeah, but I mean they start to like kind of come into because Spawn was also in that general time, and also one of my favorite. Spawn was 97,
so it's still kind of late 90s. Yeah.
One of my favorite comics my favorite comic book movie is Dick Tracy with Warren Beatty.
Yeah, really Well, that's good. Early. That's like 90, I think. Yeah, that's early.
Yeah, if you want to watch like a really good like comic book movie and how they were kind of doing that back in the day, because it is a perfect, like, Dick Tracy was a serious comic. Like it was something that like Dick Tracy is 3-panel comics in the newspaper, but he was always fighting these like he was a detective and he was going up against these impossible characters like Bricktop and stuff like that, or Brickhead, I think. I can't remember his name. But then they translated it for the screen, and they're like, no, we're going to make this as goofy looking as possible. Warren Beatty is still going to wear a bright yellow trench coat the entire time. But like the way that they shot it and the way that they wrote it and the way that they had the characters done in it was phenomenal. Like they really, like somebody, it was a labor of love. It was very obviously somebody took a lot of time.
Breathless Mahoney was played by Madonna?
Yes, Madonna was in it too.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, 90s Madonna. Whew.
I was going to say, but there were some bad comic book films made before. I mean, there was The Punisher in the 80s, which
it's true.
I think...
Yeah. I never saw that, but yeah, I never heard any good things about it.
I saw it and it's bad. I mean, I will say that like I think the Punisher in a lot of ways is just kind of irredeemable as a character. So it's like, what can you really fucking do about that?
Right. Like and of course, like you see a Punisher skull on somebody's truck now, you want to stay away from that person.
Well, I mean, I think when you think about Frank Castle, it's sort of like, you know, he basically says that the woke state failed me, so I'm going to get revenge myself. Like, that's just kind of like, if you're kind of ethically compromised from the jump there. And then also, I don't know, like looking back on it, Blade is a really interesting one because I think Blade is both a dumb movie and an incredibly fun movie. And I think Blade, one of the things that I find really interesting about it is just that, like, I feel as though they must have faced so many headwinds in doing that, both for everything about the subject and the way it's shot and everything about, and the fact that it's a comic book movie. And if I remember correctly, Blade actually made so much more money than they were expecting that it's kind of the genesis of a lot of the stuff with Marvel films being made, because I want to say it was Sony financed that film, but they did not expect it to do as well as it did. I still have a tremendous fondness for that film.
Oh God, yeah. It's I was rewatching it recently, and it's still it hits so well, and not just in a I don't feel like it hits necessarily in a nostalgic way, but like you said, it's a goofy movie, but like Wesley Snipes is so impossibly cool in it the entire time.
Yeah,
to kind of forgive how stupid like all the vampire stuff is, but like it's vampire stuff, of course it's stupid.
What's something that's very, very funny is, you know how there's the kind of like, anytime you think of 90s techno soundtrack, you always think of the club music scene from Blade.
Mm-hmm.
You know what that is?
What is that?
That is a remix of the song Confusion by New Order, which does not sound like that at all. But it's on, if I remember correctly, it's on one of their like rarities and B-sides collections. So it was kind of floating out there in the ether for a while, and I guess nobody ever got that deep into their fucking collection to be like, wait, the song's hard as hell. What the hell? What's going on here? But no, I recently, I didn't rewatch Blade so much as I was like, Cynthia and I were talking about it, and I went through and like rewatched a bunch of the scenes on YouTube, which is an annoying way to watch a movie, but I'm taken aback by the sound design is like second only to like Heat level of guns are loud,
yeah.
which is,
yeah,
they make it realistic. And then also I think like the physicality of all of the fight scenes is actually really kind of intense. Like there's way more, there's so much physicality in that, and just like the way it just feels intense. It feels brutal watching it, but not in like a gross way, but just more like a, like it kind of stresses you out.
Yeah. You see a guy get pinned to a wall with a silver spike and then like screamingly turn into ash as he burns away. Like, yeah, it was, you managed to get away because, you know, also in the 90s, like in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and, you know, other cartoons that of the time, especially X-Men too, like nobody dies. But if you want to kill something, they've got to be robots. So all the foot soldiers in the TMNT animated show were robots. The Sentinels and X-Men, you know, there's something that you can kind of blow up.
Well, the putties in fucking Power Rangers, they just explode.
Yeah, exactly.
they're not people. Yeah,
exactly. So Blade was, you know, it still kind of continues along that, where like you found a way to kill a bunch of characters without showing a whole lot of blood, even though they're vampires and even though blood is an important part of it, especially the first part where there is a blood rave, but blood can come out of the sprinkler system. It just can't come out of a person.
I'm also interested too, because Steven Dorff, I mean, he was never an A-list actor, but like there's a part of me that kind of feels like Steven Dorff is perfect in that role, even if he kind of like oversells it sometimes, because that guy is just like, he's basically like, what if a vampire was on cocaine?
Right.
Like, I think he does a very good job of it.
It's a 90s guy vampire. He's incredibly 90s guy vampire.
I know I've seen Steven Dorff in some other like indie-ish, like, you know, small distributor Hollywood movies where he's wearing like the infamous yellow tinted glasses that 90s dudes in LA wore. Like, it's just he is that person in real life.
Oh man. So I just looked up 90s comic book movies, and there's a lot of unremarkable stuff in here, but the 90s comic book movies do include The Crow.
Oh, good point.
The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, which 90, 93, and then I think the Turtles in Time was somewhere in the late 90s.
I was going to say about Turtles was interesting because as a side, before you continue on the list, but I was going to bring that up before you mentioned it.
Oh, sorry. So Blank Man, also a big one. Damon Wayans,
I remember that.
Yeah, very funny one. And Judge Dredd. And
right.
The RoboCop 2 and 3, but because I think RoboCop was in the 80s, but one that I feel gets glossed over a lot is Tank Girl too, which was a 94 film.
Tank Girl, yeah, that's which is kind of an indie comic too. As a British guy, it's I can't remember his name, and I feel like an asshole, but he is actually the guy who was the illustrator behind Gorillaz. He and Damon Albarn created the sort of concept. Jamie Hewlett, I think his name was, but
Jamie
his
Hewlett
style is very, very particular. Yeah, Judge Dredd, bad movie, but yeah, once again, you're right. But yeah, none of the major the big franchise ones got made at the time. It's interesting about Ninja Turtles though, because I had this conversation and it led to some funny places with Joe and Hussein. But did you ever read the actual original Eastman and Laird cartoon, like the comic books for Ninja Turtles?
No, but I know I've read like one or two of them. I know that it's very dark.
It's dark, and it's far more intended for an adult audience, not in like a sexy way, but like a violence and also threats of violence way. Like they swear, there's people die. Like the city they live in, which I can't remember if it's supposed to be fucking New York or just like some analog city, is like it kind of feels like something out of the Warriors. Every turn there's like gangs of dudes with headbands doing kung fu shit on you. Like it's violent, and the TV cartoon was so well received by kids, and it was definitely made into a kids franchise. But the original comic books were just very emphatically not intended for, like, I mean, you could say they were probably intended for like adolescents and above, but they weren't intended for little kids. Whereas like you think about the Ninja Turtles TV show and then the movies in a weird way are maybe one step closer to the original in that regard, the puppets notwithstanding and the big suits, but still like, yeah, there's so little similarity between those originals and the TV show that we all know, the da 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 da, all that.
From what I understand, because I didn't watch a lot of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles when I was a kid, but from what I understand, like later on, it became more dark and more violent. Like they did 3 or 4 seasons where it was fun and goofy, and then they just kind of hit a big switch and they said, no, we're going to make this fucked up and violent. But my daughter went through a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles phase for a while, and we ended up watching a lot of the newer stuff. Not just the new movie that with like Seth Rogen, which was great, but a lot of the newer animated series as well. And they're not bad. I will say that if you're going to do mutant teenage turtles that can do kung fu, they're doing it well.
The real heads will remember coming out of their shells the live music performance Ninja Turtles video.
Oh my god, this is so fucking terrible.
I know, I had it when I was like 7 and I loved it, and I wouldn't be able to stand like 90 seconds on YouTube of it now. It's just
it's just god awful. But yeah, there's the 90s cartoon or comic book movies did exist. They were just not pigeonholed into what they are now with Marvel. But I feel like DC is kind of at least trying to do something different.
They were the sort of the trying to think of the comparison here, the sort of Don Bluth to the Disney of comic books. Yeah,
Disney's never going to make Peacemaker, especially not the one we got with John Cena, where you can see his penis way too much in it. Still a great show though. But it's just not something you're ever going to see come out of Disney.
We talked about this, about animated things being for adults, like not, because obviously the closest we have really was stuff that was marketed that way in America that wasn't Japanese, wasn't anime, was Heavy Metal, which is much older. I mean, it came out in the early 80s, but hilariously, Heavy Metal is based on Moebius, the French cartoonist's work. Like and I made the joke on the other episode that like your options were basically Heavy Metal and like the animated sequences from Pink Floyd's movie The Wall. But like like they just really didn't have much. But I would say that what's interesting to me is that, I mean, looking back on it, there are a few examples of things that are notionally intended for like a general audience to include kids that are very much not as like ultra kid friendly as we might consider a thing needing to be now. I would say off the top of my head, obviously The Secret of Nim. When was
Watership Down?
Watership Down. Well, also the British ones like When the Wind Blows, Watership Down. those are far more for a more mature audience, and there's just a lot like the kind of creepy fear factor in Secret of Nim with the spiders and just like the enormous like the combine harvester just tearing up shit, you know what I mean, or like when they're plowing, and like there's a level of like kind of like gross horror in that it makes it, to me, it's like it's a movie that you would show like a 9, 10, 11-year-old, under supervision, but you definitely wouldn't show it to a 4-year-old. Whereas now it's like people think, oh, animated movie about mice, let's show it to a 4-year-old.
I think that's what people kind of thought about it back then too, which is why I ended up watching Watership Down.
Well, I mean, that's why I watched fucking Kindergarten Cop, because my mom's like, oh, it's a movie about kindergartners.
Yeah, it's the kindergartners. Yeah, my mom's just like, oh, I loved Watership Down. I mean, look, my parents took me to go see Starship Troopers in theaters because they loved the Heinlein book, and that was first off, it sparked a love for the movie for me, for certain, but that came out in 97 when I was 14 years
if
old.
It makes you feel any better. My mom took me to see The Rock in theaters, as well as Jerry Maguire, which at age 11 was like, no, these are fun movies, but like there's just I think she was definitely like, oh well, I guess you're just gonna have to watch a sex scene. Not much I can do about that. It's like, yep, I guess I am.
And it's hard to judge and gauge like what kids should or shouldn't watch now, especially the stuff that we grew up with. Like, I don't think I would show my daughter Neverending Story right now, just because it's a weird fever. Not just because like it's sad because Artex dies, but then he comes back. But it's just a weird fever dream of a movie. Like,
I also think that the two things that scared me or bothered me the most as a kid, and that was Artax dying, and then the like fucking statues like obliterating the night with lasers, and like he's like a burnt corpse inside the suit of armor.
Yeah,
like it's a little more graphic than I think you would see in a thing that was deliberately intended for kids now. But also, like, I guess in a way, I'm not 100% sure, but I remember those books being more intended for like later grade school kids. Like, my brother read the Michael Ende books in German, and obviously the Neverending Story is interesting because it's so obviously German, but like it's not. It's like, if I remember correctly, everyone's speaking English.
They are, but it's a very German story. Yes.
Well, it's not only a very German story, and it's a very German school, but then also the kids are running around wearing what they call Schultech, like the big square backpacks, which we had in Germany when I was a little kid. But they're square backpacks with like kind of a rigid frame in them, so you can have like, it's like imagine a rigid lunchbox with a soft covering, and so you can put all your school supplies in there, like your mandatory school supplies, like your big plastic ruler, your big measuring angle, because like fucking it's Germany, all your coloring supply, all that stuff, and yeah, the kids are all wearing those, and it's just like, that's just, even at 7 or 8 watching that movie, I'm like 6 maybe, it was like, yeah, that's not America. No. I know America and I know Germany now. That's not America. Yeah.
Now, my daughter really did love Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park 2, which are movies that I saw when I was 10 and probably shouldn't have. But I don't know. I saw them move. It's right. Like, I saw Jurassic Park. It came out in 93. I saw it in theaters twice. And it's a very thrilling, exciting, there's not a lot of blood in it. There's a little bit, but not like, viscerally dinosaurs tearing you apart or anything.
Fucking Nedry's death is really disturbing. That's a little.
It's not bloody,
even
though.
You don't see that much, but like, no, it's just a guy screaming, getting ripped apart inside a car, and you can see the silhouettes of the car and the guy getting eaten by a velociraptor. Also, a guy gets eaten sitting on the toilet and like gets bitten in half. Like, that's.
But again, not very bloody, but it is very. Yeah, it's
I mean, and I guess when you think about it, the guy getting his arm cut off in Star Wars is pretty like,
right.
Star Wars has become so kind of like sanitized in a lot of ways from how we have perceived it as a pop culture thing. And I think if you actually go back and watch Star Wars without any of kind of like the prelude to it or any of like the hype around it, there's more violence in that and threats of violence and stuff than you would.
Everybody on Jabba's sail barge, which, like, look, bad guys for sure, but they kill everybody. And I'm going to tell you that, like, if there was one slave on there, we know Slave Leia was there. I'm going to tell you that there's probably other ones that were not liberated at the end of that. And they're just like, no, just blow it all up into the giant desert mouth. We'll be fine. It's cool. We're the heroes. We don't need to think about
fucking Alderaan and kill every single person on a planet. And right. Obi-Wan Kenobi's like, ugh, that makes me feel kind of woozy. I feel a little bad right now.
I got a big oof feeling going on, guys. Here, I'm going to sit down.
Like billions of people have just died, and it's like, I feel like some shit happened. Yeah, I would say I can only think back to movies that I feel like they scared me and they bothered me long enough that my parents probably realized maybe this wasn't a good idea. But if I were to name, I don't really remember a ton of them because there weren't that many, but there were enough in retrospect where I'm like, this is kind of bad. Like I definitely feel like they were things that kind of disturbed me about certain things, but it just was a different era in terms of like how you got movies, how you you'd rent a movie or like you saw it in theaters, and like obviously there wasn't anything in like the Disney movies that was going to be bad, but I can recall, obviously I think I've told the story about Ghost, and the thing that bothered me was the demons take you to hell scenes, which I was 6, so probably not appropriate.
There's no telling what about a movie is going to fuck a kid up, because I watched Little Shop of Horrors when I was really young, which like I've gone back and watched it like in the last couple of years. It's a very funny movie. It's got, Rick Moranis. It's got who's the dentist? Steve. I can't. Somebody's gonna yell at me. It's early. My brain's not working. But it's a funny movie. But the thing is that it's a movie about a plant that eats people. And I lived in a house that was full of plants, so I was constantly I was scared of the basement because that's where my father would overwinter a lot of his plants and do a lot of growing stuff in the basement, especially in the cold seasons. And I was scared to go down there because what if the aloe plant decides that it's hungry and wants to eat me?
Between you and your dad and all of the growing and indoor growing you've done, there must have been so many times the cops have been scoping you out, thinking you're growing weed, and you just never are.
No, my father, no matter how much I try to get my dad to try weed, he's not into it.
I know you wouldn't do it, but I'm just saying, I just imagine that the cops, if they're keeping tabs on who's buying shit from the grow supply store, y'all's propensity towards indoor gardening must have come up at least once.
I don't remember anybody ever visiting us. The thing is that with a marijuana grow lab, you've got to have a lot of light, a lot of energy being used, and we're talking about a couple of grow lights that were in the basement to keep some of his stuff that can't overwinter outside. He would bring it inside and put it in the basement.
You're also assuming a lot of common sense and a sense of proportion on the part of American police. So
I'm just thinking about St. Louis cops, and I just don't think they gave a shit.
Yeah, they're too busy too busy allegedly swerving to not hit dogs and crashing into bars. I would say, to me, let me think for a second. You know what's interesting is going back and watching, I actually went back and watched those scenes in Ghosts. They aren't that scary to me now. It's just it's a movie. But I could feel a sense of kind of anxiety about I know it's going to happen, and I haven't seen it since it scared the shit out of me when I was 6. And there's that kind of built-in sort of instinctive response of the thing that's still there from when you were 6. And then I watched them oh, okay, yeah, cool, all right, yeah, they do that. This is pretty intense for a romance kind of drama. Also, I know now that the way that they created the horrible demon sounds is those are slowed down, pitched down baby cries.
That's right, you told me that, yeah.
But I remember Rick Moranis' character dying in The Untouchables, the way that's presented kind of disturbed me. While I was watching The Untouchables with my dad, my dad took us to see, I told you, Hunt for Red October when I was 5. I didn't understand any of it.
That's also a movie I still haven't watched.
You haven't watched The Hunt for Red October?
Yeah, no.
Didn't we talk about it on this show?
We've talked about it. I've read most of the book. Look, there are a lot of 90s action movies I just missed because my father did not watch action movies. So I wasn't exposed to anything like that. If my father was watching an action movie, it was Stalag 17 or it was Tora or something, And my dad's not even a World War II head. It's just that was the films that he would have watched.
Some fucking dad movies, yeah.
I know, incredible dad movies, yeah. And a lot of MASH. Watched a lot of MASH.
I mean, there was a joke, because, there was the Million Mom March in America in 99, I think, or 2000, where it was about kind of I think it was for gun safety, but I can't remember what it was. And there was a joke in a political cartoon that I remember seeing that the Million Dad March was all the dads taking their sons to see Gladiator that weekend. And I had seen it with my dad twice that weekend. So it's just extremely funny. I mean, I was 15 when I saw this. That's very different.
That's okay. My dad didn't take me to go see. My father, the only times I remember him talking about taking anybody to a movie was taking my older brother to go watch one of the Monty Python movies. I don't really remember my father taking me to movies. It's just, going to the theater just wasn't really something that we did. I'm trying to be better about that with my daughter, but she always wants to go watch what was it? Madam Web, which was god awful, and recently we watched Sonic 3 and the Dogman movie, which are fine for kids' movies. I tell you, the Sonic movies are good Jim Carrey movies. If you want to see some old school Jim Carrey being goofy,
we used to watch Man, I mean, like, I look back on it now and I think about what are some of the movies that I really enjoyed as a little kid. It's not, I mean, my parents took us, like, because, you know, I turned 5 in 1989. And so you think about the kind of the classic sort of run of big blockbuster Disney animated movies, starting with The Little Mermaid.
Mhm.
Like, I saw all of those in theaters. But when I look back on it, I remember watching The Brave Little Toaster, which in retrospect has some interesting, the idea that like the vacuum gets so depressed and has a manic episode and tries to inhale his own power cord to commit suicide. That's an interesting thing. I think all the cars in the scrapyard singing about how they've been abandoned and they're now worthless, and the song just goes worthless. It's kind of a banger actually, but like the music in that is actually pretty good. But it's a very it basically, the Brave Little Toaster creates the impression that all of your appliances and electronics that you buy over the course of your lifetime are sentient and have feelings, and you upgrading or recycling them fills them with such a profound sense of abandonment that you should feel guilty about it.
Yeah, that's the entire Toy Story series as well. So they're still leaning heavily into the why are you abandoning your toys? They're real kind of thing. Which,
but in this case, they aren't toys. They are a lamp, an electric blanket, a toaster, and a vacuum cleaner. And they go on a sort of like incredible journey style quest to find their previous owner, who is like a kid who's now starting in college. It's an odd one.
The thing is that, you know, nowadays when they're making movies for kids, a lot of the movies have something for the adults too. You know, they'll maybe make some jokes. Like I said, Sonic 3 is all the scenes with Sonic the Hedgehog and whoever the live action main character is, kind of boring. But when you get Jim Carrey on screen, he really knocks it out of the park. And like back then, you didn't have the years and years of like, we've already made these movies and traumatized a bunch of kids. Let's see if we can make something that's maybe a little less traumatic, or we at least have an understanding of like what kids like and what they're going to want to watch. Instead, it's just a bunch of adults doing cocaine being like, I don't know, the horse dies in the swamp because he's sad. Fuck it. Go. We're doing this.
I mean, in fairness, I think that's in the book.
That's true. Yeah, fair.
You're implying that the children's author Michael Ende was, when he wrote Die Unendliche Geschichte, he was off his nuts on coke, which
right.
I mean,
which is
Germans in the 70s
just,
and 80s entirely possible.
Right. Or he could have just been very German. But, you know, the same thing goes with a lot of the stuff that we were watching back then. It's just like, you know, it's not, they didn't really know what buttons to hit to make, you know, the brain of a 7-year-old completely light up. And now they do, which is good, I guess, because the movies and the TV shows for kids are a little bit better. But at the same time, you know, if you're not having a traumatic experience when you're 7 watching something, are you really living? So I don't know. I don't know if I've done that with my child yet. She hasn't been like, no, I can't. Oh, no, actually, you know what? We have Princess and the Frog. She refuses to watch that. And she so far has a lifelong like hatred of frogs because she had a real problem with transformations when she was a kid, and probably goes back to some of her neurospiciness that we just didn't know about at the time. But she did not like the fact that something could look like one thing and then suddenly change into another thing. But yet she loves Transformers. So I don't know, maybe if it's a giant robot and not a prince that turns into a frog. But she did not like Princess and the Frog. It's one of my favorite Disney princess movies, and she refuses to watch it ever again, which is kind of sad.
It was interesting for me because I don't recall having nightmares about stuff that scared me in movies, but just being like bothered by it, like the violence or like, you know, people dying or scary stuff. But the only thing I can think of where I have a very clear memory of having a really, really scary nightmare about it was actually Smaug the Dragon.
Oh, from The Hobbit.
From The Hobbit.
Yeah, I love the Rankin Bass Hobbit.
It was both the Rankin. I don't think I had seen that at that point. We're talking about the Ralph Bakshi one, like the animated one. I hadn't seen that yet, but I did. My brother had an illustrated version of The Hobbit with like, you know, each chapter had like a big full page illustration in it. And obviously Smaug fascinated me. I thought he was cool as hell. But I guess I just had a dream that I got attacked by Smaug and he breathed fire on me and I couldn't shoot him in his missing scale with an arrow when I was like 5. But I still drew all these pictures in kindergarten of Smaug. I thought he was cool as hell. You know what I mean? Like there's an extent to which I don't know if you can predict it, but to me, I'm trying to think back on it. Anything that bothered me or like weirded me out. Yeah, I actually was... once I got to be about, well, certainly at double digits, I think there wasn't really anything like in retrospect, I think having had a lot more life experiences since then where like you can kind of relate to certain things and stuff is going to affect you differently or at least remind you or like resonate in a way, makes me less inclined to watch something. Certainly like if it's something involving like a child in peril, I just can't fucking watch it. But you know what I mean? Like I actually wasn't that affected, but I just think that, you know, the early childhood ages, like we're talking, you know, 4 through 7 or so, I think that like, you know, you can't really predict it. You can't really tell what's going to do it. No, you probably shouldn't watch a movie where the villains get taken to hell by screaming ghost black demon things that are shadows with baby cries pitched down with a fucking sampler. But I mean, my parents, you know what I mean? Different generation. They did the best they could. They thought I would want to be entranced by Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore making fucking pottery together for some reason. Or maybe it was just they wanted to watch a movie and they're like, this is what we're watching because we want to watch it. We can put the VCR menu screen on when there's sex. But they didn't realize you can't put the VCR menu on and block out the sound of the demons taking you to hell, which in fairness, who could have predicted that would be part of this romantic drama with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore? Yeah,
I think the one movie that did stick with me for a long time is I watched Arachnophobia when I was way too young, which is a 1990s.
I saw that.
Yeah,
I remember hearing about it. Yeah.
And you know, it's one of those things where like I'm looking at it on Wikipedia and it's a horror comedy, so I'm sure that my parents were like, "Oh, it's funny." But actually, I don't know if my parents. I also had a babysitter that let us watch movies that we shouldn't have been watching because there was older kids, and the older kids wanted to watch stuff like Jaws, and they wanted to watch Arachnophobia. Arachnophobia came out in 1990, so I would have been 7 when that came out. So I don't know how I ended up seeing it, but I know that like Jaws has always stuck with me. I've never watched Jaws since I was 5 years old and saw it. I know, like, look, I know that now if I watch it, it'll be fine. I know that the shark is mechanical and kind of shitty, but also I don't have any real desire to watch Jaws. But I might go back and revisit Arachnophobia because John Goodman, Jeff Bridges, and a few other people that
I was actually like, I mean, it's interesting because there's some things where those instinctive reactions are still there. You know, I think I told the story before on the show about having a bumblebee crawling on me when I was 3 and everyone like being stand still, and it still stung me and it hurt like shit. Mm-hmm. And like I had like for a long time kind of a panic response anytime bees would be around that I had to suppress. But then for one, I got stung by yellow jackets a couple times when I was a teenager and like it's painful and it hurt. It's kind of like throbbing and sore after. It's like like itchy pain, but it's not horrible. And then also one day I was changing my daughter when she was like 3 days old and a yellow jacket had come in through an open window and tried to land on her, and I slapped the fuck out of that bee. I back slapped that thing so hard it basically entered into like the 4th dimension of beedom. It became a bee in the Jurassic period. And it's like I normally wouldn't have done anything that could potentially have angered a bee, you know, because I was like I just had that sort of instinctive response. But sorry, you try to land on my baby, fucking you are getting slapped into a new dimension. You are getting slapped into a whole new plane of reality. And in fairness, it didn't die and it just went out the window and got the fuck out of there.
I get it. There's no pollen here. I get it, man. Just open the window. Let me go. It's fine. I stepped on a bee not too long ago, sometime in the warmer days because I was running around barefoot outside. But yeah, I stepped on a bee. The last time I got stung was when I got a wasp down my shirt when I was like 7 or 8. And it stung me about 20 times. And so that my first 20 stings were all from one wasp trying to get the fuck out of my shirt. And then but I've never had like that reaction of like I have to run away from bees and wasps. I leave them alone. I don't go anywhere near them, but I don't also freak out when I see them because like, you know, they're I'm not allergic and they're little tiny things. Like, okay, it's going to fucking hurt, but like I've hurt worse, you know?
I'm not going to say that I freak out, but like, for example, if I had one in my car, I probably would pull over as soon as it was safe to get it out of the car.
Yeah,
which technically speaking, you probably should do, but I wouldn't be able to just ignore it. But I will say this much. I realize you telling me this, that there may be another memory because when I was 4.
We're unlocking a lot of childhood memories today, huh?
I was visiting my mom's parents, and my mom was estranged from her parents, so like that's the only time I've actually ever met them in person. They lived in rural North Carolina, and my grandfather had a bench, like a swing, on their back porch, and hanging from it was like a comically perfect wasp's nest, like a perfect oval suspended by the little strand stem thing. And my grandfather, because it was the weekend of the 4th of July, he had actually gone and gotten me and my brother cap guns. and you can see where this is going. My brother was sitting on the swing, oblivious to the wasp nest, fired the cap gun for fun, not even thinking, and triggered his disappearance in a cloud of wasps, effectively, in my recollection.
A cap gun doesn't even it just makes sound. It's just a noise maker.
But it's he must have fired it very close, and it's both sound and then also it does
percussion.
It does have percussion and like the dust and smoke, and they got furious. And if I remember correctly, they basically had to grab my brother, take his clothes off, and like more or less swat all these wasps off of him. And then my grandfather just went and grabbed some newspaper and some gasoline and got it on fire and just smoked the nest out. He was wearing gloves, and I remember watching him holding it to smoke this nest out, and then basically he grabbed the nest with he may have grabbed it with his gloves, took it, put it on the ground, and dumped gasoline on it and set it on fire.
Ugh.
And so that was that was another formative bee experience, I guess. Formative bee experiences. And so, yeah, you know what? I mean, when I think about things that are scary as kids, it's like maybe sometimes also it has to do with if there's a certain thing about whatever is scary that bothers you. You know what I mean? You might be able to watch a scene as a 7-year-old and not be bothered, but for another kid, it's something about the facial expression just creeps you out, and that ticks a certain box. And so it's I'm not at that point with my daughter yet, but I'm just going to try to not let the I love this movie when I was a kid aspect of it be you should, because also quite frankly, if you found me being because of nostalgia I have to make my daughter watch Rockadoodle, I hope that you come and euthanize me.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff from the past that I'm not going to show her, but like I said, sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. My daughter freaked out from Princess and the Frog, which is a fairly I think that movie came out in 2009, and it is not a scary movie whatsoever. There's peril in it. There is, it's a Disney movie, so they got to kill at least one being to make you sad, and it's a firefly. But for the most part, though, it's not scary. But my daughter is completely traumatized by it. So you will do your best, you will try your hardest, and yet something you do will traumatize your child. And they'll be I can't watch this movie from 2015 anymore because I watched it when I was too young. And it's just it's about a frog it's about a guy that turns into a frog, and then they kiss, and then he's not a frog anymore. I don't know, but it's that we all have something in our lizard brains that trigger, I guess, for these things. And
I'm just laughing about the idea of your daughter can't watch this movie because she's seen too many of the fucking shit, it's the frog on the unicycle thing set to the
Here comes the boy.
Memes from Inside Out about what's going on inside their head, and then she watches Inside Out, is expecting that, and it never happens. Well, she's just really brutally let down.
The frog on the unicycle is generally what's going through my head.
Yeah, man. Well, you know what? All I can say is my daughter's been on one big time with sleep stuff, and it's been challenging, and I am brain dead right now, and it's just a phase, I know, but it's just one of those things where multiple wake-ups per night right now, so...
Well, Nate, I think that's a podcast then. We'll let us both go rest our brains. You've got baby, and I've been up way too early this morning. So everybody, thank you for listening. If you like this, we also have our Patreon, patreon.com/hellofaWayToDie, where we have all kinds of great bonus content out there. Currently, just started up Deadliest Warrior Season 2 with Jordan from Better Way 2A. It's the SWAT versus the GSG-9, which I guess is the German SWAT team.
Yeah.
It's if you're wondering, does it get better and less stupid? No, of course it doesn't. But if it did, then there'd be no point for you to continue to watch Deadliest Warrior. So we've got 2 more seasons of that to go through. We're doing that every month. Carrie and I are doing MASH episodes. We got all kinds of good stuff going out there. So check that out. You can get it at $5 a month. You can get access to everything. And of course, we also have our website, whatahellofawaytodad.com, where there are weekly updates, things you can buy, things that you can check out, blogs. I send out a weekly newsletter, all kinds of good stuff. So however you want us to get you information, we will get it to you. But thank you for listening, as always. Nate, thank you for joining me. Thanks for setting aside some time. I know you've been podcasting a lot today, so it's good to get this one down. This is an easy one, just talking about Marvel stuff. Good times.
Well, like I said, you choose your own adventure on how you're going to expose your child to something that might traumatize them. But you just have to ask yourself the question, is the tender pottery scene from Ghost worth it? And I would say the answer is probably no.
Well, you could, I actually had this idea of my daughter really wants to watch Deadpool and Wolverine, and it is not a movie that she can watch because there are just some things that like you can't, like when she's like, "What's pegging?" That's not a thing I can explain to a 9-year-old.
Yeah, we're like, "Oh, I love Ryan Reynolds. I want to see more of his movies like Van Wilder."
Yeah, like there's information that you need to pick up from the streets before you can watch this. But I was thinking like I could get it and like cut it down to just all the cool fight scenes because I know that's what she really wants to watch, and just call it a day there. Like, look, we're gonna watch 20 minutes of Deadpool killing dudes with Wolverine's skeleton. We're gonna watch this part where they fight inside of a Hyundai Odyssey, and we're gonna watch this end scene. That's really all you need to watch. All the rest of it, all the other Ryan Reynolds stuff, you don't need to see that for another 10 to 15 years.
Well, I'm gonna leave you with an idea here because we want some fan feedback. Francis, I'm asking, think of what is your example, if you have one, of a movie that, regardless of any competence it might show, is so ethically compromised that it completely it removes it from any consideration.
Oh, very, very simple. I got it right now because it was the movie that I watched over and over on my Betamax when I was a kid. Disney's Dumbo. That like
the ethics of the film are such that it's
an incredibly racist film. the jive talking crows, the abuse of animals that happens in it. Like, it is a movie. It was made in the 40s. It's an animated movie made in the 40s, and like we just don't do that anymore. Like, all of it. So it's a very like trying to watch it later. It's there's no parts of it that you're just like, oh well, this. No, it's all god awful. And it's just 1940s Disney. That's just how it was. And it's one that like my dad was always like, "Are you gonna watch this?" Like, no, it's not a good movie. Like, I don't know why you guys let me watch it other than here's a way to keep the kid quiet for 70 minutes.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. For me, the answer was, well, I mean, obviously Boondock Saints, we've talked about that. I would venture that the 2005 film Crash is so morally and ethically compromised.
Is that the sexy Crash or is it the racist Crash?
Racist Crash. Okay. Sexy Crash is 96, I think.
We gotta make sure. Is this
David Cronenberg Crash is different than whoever fucking directed Racist Crash?
Yeah, I do remember watching Racist Crash, and I thought it was a bit much even when I watched it back then.
I watched it fucked up on pain meds from knee surgery, and I was like, this is the worst shit I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, Cynthia actually told me that she has a question she treads lightly on, but asking any prospective partners their opinion on Crash because if they liked Crash and they just can't date.
What a weird.
I passed the test. She's a film person. I mean, there's other ethical challenges, but she's a film person, and Crash receives so many accolades, and she's also black and like an American, and it's like, I'm sorry, but that movie is no.
I just want to know like what date did that come up on? Like, where it was just like, is that a second date kind of thing? He's just feeling.
I don't know.
Like,
I'll ask her. I'll ask her and report back. But yeah, for fans, that's what it will end on. Is I've given my examples. Francis gave his examples. Do you have a film that you know of that like it's not necessarily incompetent or badly done, but it is so ethically compromised that it's just you could not in good conscience watch it or recommend it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Sound off down below in the comments. This is going to go up on our Patreon, and it's going to go up on our live regular feed and on YouTube. So if you're listening on our regular feed, you'll have to come over to the Discord. If you're a member of our Patreon, you can come over to the Discord and talk about it there. We will have those discussions in the Discord too. So Nate, I appreciate you taking the time out. Everybody, I appreciate you listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Have a good one.